So yeah, it's a quick one from me this morning. It was just an elephant in the room I wanted to address, which is actually about female training, so programming from my perspective. Um, Typically, personal trainers will run you through the £20 an hour plus sessions where you're going to go in and they're going to say, like, you only have me once this week, which once in a week is not going to be optimal in terms of your goals because you still have the rest of the week where you can sidetrack and potentially slow down in terms of your progress. So ideally you want something a bit more committed in terms of how many hours you put into the gym or a longer term coaching program. But anyway, they'll say, oh, you've only got an hour with me max, so in this time you need to try and function everything together. So there's like 20 minutes of cardio, 20 minutes of abs, and like 20 minutes of really light glute work, not a full leg session. But this a leg session where it's so poorly executed and structured, where you end up doing a maximum amount of reps without this structure or any consideration for volume or time and attention, etc., which triggers muscle hypertrophy or muscle growth, that you're just going to be having aches the next day. Where if you're a new trainer, then if you have these aches, it means your actual TDEE, so your total daily energy expenditure for the next day, it probably will be lower because you're going to be aching, which means your activity is going to be lower. And if you do go train, it's going to limit the kind of performance you are able to put into your training. So how I see it is that you want to find something a bit longer term. So if you wanted a coach, look for something in person, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, where you're able to program a higher frequency worth of training, whereas you could actually do 3 times a week, twice a week. I would say no less than twice a week. The biggest misconception for female training for me is this whole toned nature. So in terms of training itself and science itself, there's no actual definition of toned, but what a lot of personal trainers have had to try and manipulate from this is the fact that females typically want larger muscle groups, glutes, hamstrings, maybe delts, a decent sculpted back, but then they want a lower body composition, so lower body fat percentage, which means the muscle becomes more defined. So we need to break it down because you can't do it all at once. So we need to provide the way a starting point is. Let's say we just have the typical, I don't know, can you say average size girl? I'm not even sure anymore. But we'll just completely picture what you want. So no maximal level of body fat, so under 30% as a female, and let's say we can start training. So we need to focus rather on the band stuff, because the band stuff doesn't really work. There's no progression in that element. Bands have their purpose, but they shouldn't be the core of your training. So let's start with the glutes, for example. Why are we thinking about doing banded sidewalks, donkey kickbacks? This stuff doesn't really work, especially, and then don't even get me started on this Stairmaster kickback stuff, because there is literally 0 point to that. It really annoys me. So we gotta think about actually progressive overload. So at the end of the day, these are body parts, these are muscles that you have to train. So we need to take a scientifically proven approach, like I would with men. So you do the same with men, women, we all train the same. So think about your hip hinge work for glutes. You could start off with a kettlebell swing. People think the kettlebell swing in general is kind of a front squat followed by a front raise with the kettlebell, whereas it's more of a hip hinge movement where you're going hip extension with a neutral spine and then flexing the hips and driving your hips forward. It's all done via momentum, so should be no arm action to it. That can even be done as a warm-up, just to warm up the hip flexors and extensors and hamstrings, glutes, and some of the posterior chain. Then we could actually move on into some kind of more progressive overload kind of glute stuff, where we could go a barbell hip thrust or the new Nautilus glute drive, which some gyms are starting to incorporate. We have lunge variations, we have squat variations in hip extension, because obviously the more upright you are and the more knee dominant you make your squats, the more quad it targets. Whereas if we are able to shift the bar and the gravity of the weight itself, then we could go hip extension with a lower bar, neutral spine obviously throughout the entire movement, and we could honestly drive our hips back into full extension, activating the glutes more. Then we have things like the RDL. We got RDL, we got different kind of deadlifts, sumo deadlifts, etc. So that's like the glutes in general, but then we obviously want more dominant legs in general, so we need to focus on hamstring kind of movements, and quad movements as well, because we obviously want this complete look rather than just one dominant body part. So weight training across the whole body, it needs to be done rather than just one area, and we need to be doing this once, twice, maybe 3 times a week, because the higher frequency we get, the more optimal it is in terms of muscle hypertrophy. If you kind of get what I mean. And from there we need to progress that. So say now we start off with 20 kilos, so just a normal bar on the squat, and we can do 6 reps. We need to aim to beat that by the next session. And as a rule of thumb, once we can get 12 solid reps, we can start adding more resistance to the bar. And obviously, the heavier we can get and the higher volume we can accumulate, then the larger the muscle is going to be. It is that simple. But another thing is the whole waist situation, where people want thinner waists. That comes from, obviously, genetics, so some people naturally have a thinner waist, but we can kind of create this illusion of a thinner waist by making more dominant delts. So shoulders, so a more capped shoulder look, a bit wider and a bit more dominant, compared to more dominant lower body parts, quads, hamstrings, glutes, etc. And all of a sudden then they kind of make the waist appear smaller. So if you are interested in figuring out more on how you can do this, I just want you to drop me a message or reply to this video, and I'm sure I can help you out. But at the moment it's completely hypothetical, so I couldn't go into too much detail because everybody's different. I did not want to program an RDL, for example, and tell you go do an RDL, because I do not know what your capabilities are and your skill level is. So if you've enjoyed this video, I'm planning on getting a few more